Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, the Model Programs Guide, iGuides, Practical Implementation, Planning, and Resources for Communities. My name is Carissa Rana, and I'm with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of Adobe Connect, which will help you maximize your opportunity to participate in today's webinar. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Click on the name of the file and then click the Download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenters will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a moment and help us count. Go to the chat window and type the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you'll be provided with a link to the brief survey about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is used to assist in future planning and training. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. This certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye out for your certificate. Finally, this event will be archived in approximately 3 weeks on OJJDP's online university at www.ojjdpou.org, where you can also check out past webinars. Thank you for joining us today. I will now turn it over to our moderator for today's webinar, Jennifer Tyson from OJJDP.
So thanks, Carissa. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Tyson, and I am a social science analyst in the research unit in the Innovation and Research Division of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And as Carissa said, I'm going to be giving a little overview of the presentation today, and then we'll also act as the moderator. And so I'm the project officer, the federal project officer for the Model Programs Guide, which we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to briefly introduce my co-presenters, who you'll hear from later. You can see our pictures on the screen now. But we have Marcia Cohen, who's the president of Development Services Group, DSG. And she has been involved in Model Programs Guide since its inception back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so she'll talk a little bit about some of the history there. Rachel Stevenson, who's the project director for Model Programs Guide, and then Chase Martinet, who's the deputy project director. And so first I'm going to give you, first I'm going to start with a little bit of a poll question before we jump into sort of what we're going to cover today and some of the background, just to get a sense of who's on the phone with us and how familiar you might be with Model Programs Guide. The question is, how have you primarily used the Model Programs Guide? Either to find evidence-based programs, for literature reviews, for the other resources and links, to nominate a program yourself, or if you haven't used it, you can say that, or if it's another or don't have a vote, you can leave it like that. And so we'll give people a little bit to respond here. And as we're looking at it, it looks like about a little over half of you have not actually used the Model Programs Guide before, which is good. Which is good in terms of that we will have part of the presentation give you an overview of a number of the features on the site. We are going to focus on one new resource, the implementation guides that we just published, but it looks like, based on this poll, that about half of you will also learn about some of the other resources that we have there. So I think with this, we can close this poll, and I think we have one more to go to. And so again, just to get another sense of sort of who's joining us today, if you can say what your background is, if it's either in criminal juvenile justice as a practitioner, or training and technical assistance provider, a school person, a representative, a parent, or a community member, or a researcher, or other, which I'm sure a number of us would fall into. So looking at our percentages here on sort of who's on the phone and who's listening in, it looks like about 40% of us are in the juvenile justice practitioner field, and then maybe the next highest looks like a research community. So great. All right. So thank you for those brief perspectives on maybe how we can help orient some of our comments and questions. So what are we going to cover today? We first, like I said, I'm going to do a little bit of background on what Model Programs Guide is and sort of its history. And so I will start just with an overview. Marcia will walk you through some of the historical resources on Model Programs Guide, the ones that have been around for a few years now. And then Rachel and Chase will walk us through this new resource on Implementation Guide. So to give you a sense of where we're coming from, so the Model Programs Guide is a resource that the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention funds and supports, and it's been in collaboration with the Development Services Group. The first version of it was published as a print version back in 2000, and it was really focused on delinquency prevention and evidence-based programs. And at the time was sort of one of the first efforts among the first efforts to sort of catalog what our office sort of understood to be evidence-based programs. In 2005, it transitioned to be the online database, and then similar to sort of how it operates today, in that you could actually search different program types and different resources. In 2011, so there's a number of resources that were added in the sort of 2000s, but in 2011, the Office of the Assistant Attorney General at the Office of Justice Programs, which is the larger bureau at the Department of Justice under which the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention sits, launched crimesolutions.gov, which offered a more rigorous review process and focused on the continuum of programs across the juvenile justice, but also criminal justice and victimization fields. And so Model Programs Guide, because it was in OJJDP, had been focused on juvenile justice. Now Crime Solutions really built off of a lot of what Model Programs Guide had done, and in terms of the approach and some of the process, but did offer sort of an update to what had been established in the Model Programs Guide. And so once the crimesolutions.gov launched, we at OJJDP, working with DSG, went through a process to align the programs between the two registries and repositories. And so in 2011, we finished that, we started the process, and in 2013, we finished that alignment process and relaunched Model Programs Guide, and it had a new website, but also, and the way it continues to operate today is that the program content has the most content on the site. There's other types of resources, again, Marcia's going to talk about it, and we're introducing a new one, but the programs were sort of the core and the original content of the site, and that we share a database with crimesolutions.gov. So these resources are aligned. The difference being, one, is they're presented on two different websites, but they are completely representing the same programs. And again, Model Programs Guide is focused on youth and juvenile programs, recognizing sort of our mission and our authorization and our constituency. So that was in 2013, and in 2016, we, again, working with DSG, have launched what we call the iGuides, which are short for implementation guides. And really the focus of today's presentation is to give you an overview of both the background of the other resources, but also what these implementation guides are, what they are in terms of process and how they're being developed, and then give you an overview of what the first one is addressing, which is on bullying, school-based bullying prevention, and walk you through some of the content. So, what is an iGuide? The iGuides, which, like I said, are short for implementation guides, the goal is really so in Model Programs Guide and in crimesolutions.gov, again, working closely that we are in the same bureau around evidence-based programs, there was a number of resources that were existent in those sites. And so, like I said, the program content was one, and so program content are sort of interventions that have curricula, focused on change and addressing certain problems and have a certain amount of rigorous research around them. There's also practice content, which is the sort of broader types of programs, such as mentoring as a sort of larger type, or drug courts as a larger type of programs that have a specific one of those models, but the whole of them. And Model Programs Guide also has a literature review, which are sort of around different topics. But one thing that we've gotten, and sort of sense of feedback we've gotten in talking to practitioners who try to use Model Programs Guide, is that in some ways the resource that was missing from the site was something that was sort of focused on how that interventions, right, don't operate in a vacuum. They're not operating as standalone, that they're sort of operating in a context of systems and communities with complicated problems, and that there's a number of sort of preconditions that you need to have in place before you try and implement one of these evidence-based programs on the site. That you can't sort of just take it off the site and implement it, right? There are certain sort of conditions and people you need to have in place, an understanding of the problem. And so what the iGuides really are an attempt to do is not necessarily to, present, it does present new information, but it also as a way to sort of put the other information on the site in context. So they take, it's building upon the repository of evidence-based programs and practices that were pre-existing to provide a more comprehensive and research-based resource that is focused on problems as opposed to just the interventions, but it's actually organized around problems that are, typically faced in communities. The fact that it's community focused, that it's sort of this idea that, again, that it's not just sort of somebody wanting to take something off the shelf and implement it, but sort of recognizing some of the complexities of communities and trying to address that. And then again, that it's pre-implementation, which means generally before you start the evidence-based programs and practices. So then with that, I will transition to what's on MPG, and Marcia will talk a little bit about the what's the current content on the site.
Thanks, Jen. As we just saw on the poll, about 40 of you apparently know and are familiar with the Model Program Guide. It is a repository of evidence-based juvenile justice and youth prevention, intervention, and reentry programs funded by OJJDP. I'm going to talk a little bit about crime solutions, as Jen said, that the profiles that are in Model Program Guide also appear on Crime Solutions, and when you open one, it will also take you to Crime Solutions. But this is a screenshot of OJJDP's Model Program Guide, and I want to draw your attention to the pie chart in the upper left corner, and that will always show you a breakdown of the number of programs. This one says there's 269. Actually, yesterday or the day before, the 270th program was posted, and it'll always give you a current count of the number of programs that are on there. It also shows you a breakdown of the programs at a glance, that is the percent that are effective, promising, and no effects, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, what that means. But right now you can see that 21% are effective. That's the green slice of the pie there. 59% are promising, which is the yellow slice, and 20% are no effects. That is programs that have null research findings or even harmful findings. The box to the right of that is always going to show you the most recently posted programs. Usually about 5 or 6 programs can fit in that box, and it'll show you what their rating is. In this case, they're all yellow, so they're all promising programs. To the right, or underneath that box, it is going to show you how to search for programs, and what we list there are the 10 popular topic areas, but it also takes you to the search page where you can search on other types of things. In the upper right is the new feature, the iGuides, which we're going to be spending most of the webinar talking about. But the MPG provides a resource for practitioners and communities about what works, what's promising, and what does not work. The MPG also contains useful literature reviews and links to additional resources that practitioners, policymakers, and communities can use to improve the effectiveness of interventions, enhance accountability, ensure public safety. And some of these other resources include a glossary, frequently asked questions, and other related links. This slide shows the process of reviewing and rating a program's evidence-based, and if you want to find out more about it, it's on the crimesolutions.gov website. We have an 8-step process for screening, reviewing, and rating programs, and MPG uses the same process, but the details are on the Crime Solutions website if any of you are more interested in learning about that. During the first 3 steps in the first column on the left, programs are identified through literature searches, which we conduct, or of social science databases, and they're screened for eligibility. Programs must be evaluated with at least one randomized controlled trial or quasi-experimental research design with a comparison group. If they are not, if it does, it goes on to step 4, which is the middle column, 4, 5, and 6, and it continues to be screened and reviewed. If not, it goes to the bottom part of the middle column there, and it's screened out and does not appear on Crime Solutions or Model Program Guide, and is shown in the lower portion of this figure. During steps 4 through 6, the middle column there, studies are sent to one of DSG's senior researchers who are experts in one or more juvenile justice topics. They review the evidence base, determine which studies will be reviewed, which outcomes will be scored, and which study reviewers will score them. For those programs that go on, they go to the right column. During steps 7 to 8, they're reviewed by the reviewers. They're either accepted and rated as effective, promising, or no effects, or they can be rejected, in which case they're categorized as insufficient evidence programs, and they go on the insufficient evidence list, which is posted on Crime Solutions. Just so you know, only certified study reviewers are used to score programs. We use about 20 juvenile justice experts and scholars as reviewers. And last year, there was a special emphasis on reviewing school safety programs under the Comprehensive School Safety Act. So we also have another 9 school safety reviewers, and many new school safety programs were added to the MPG at that time. These are the details of the rating system. You'll see that a single study icon, which is the column on the left, says that the programs only had 1 study in their evidence base. A multiple study icons, which is the column on the right, says that programs have more than 1 study in the evidence base, demonstrating effects in a consistent direction. To be rated effective, it means that programs have strong evidence indicating they achieved their intended outcomes when implemented with fidelity. The second, the yellow icon, is rating is promising, which means programs have some evidence indicating they achieved their outcomes, though additional research is recommended. To be rated no effects, programs must have strong evidence indicating they had no effects or even harmful effects when implemented with fidelity. Another popular feature on the Model Program Guide are the literature reviews. We now have 50 literature reviews that we've written on various juvenile justice topics. If you click on any of these topics, you will get to usually about a 7, 8, 9-page literature review. The newest ones we have just added are an arts-based program and art therapy for at-risk juvenile justice and traumatized youth, which was done in partnership with the National Endowment for the Arts. The other newest one we have on there are tribal youth in the juvenile justice system. Other recently posted lit reviews are on status offenders, implementation science, which we'll talk about more in a second, LGBTQ youth in the JJ system, and commercial sexual exploitation of children and sexual trafficking. We will continue to add about 3 new literature reviews a year. Up until we developed the implementation guides or the iGuides, MPG only presented information on what programs to implement, but very little about how to implement programs. The iGuides have changed that because it is crucial to know what will lead to successful program implementation, what will promote the condition that can lead to full and effective use of evidence-based programs. Implementation science seeks to understand the behavior of stakeholders in terms of sustainable uptake, adoption, and implementation of evidence-based programs. The intent of implementation science is to investigate and address major bottlenecks, such as social, behavioral, economic, and management issues that impede effective implementation. This Venn diagram shows that implementation is the stage that fills the gap between research and practice. So about 2 years ago, DSG began looking into the field of implementation science, reviewing many models that are out there and frameworks used to assist communities in identifying, selecting, and implementing EBPs. We know that the process of implementation, proper adaptation of the program, and fidelity to the program model are crucial to successful program implementation. Researchers have shown that programs implemented with fidelity demonstrate superior outcomes than those implemented with poor fidelity. For that matter, research shows that well-implemented interventions of an inherently less effective type of program can outperform a more effective program that is poorly implemented. Recognition of these challenges has led to the development of frameworks to assist communities in identifying, selecting, and implementing EBPs. And after much work, we have developed for OJJDP our own model, which we will talk about next. I'll hand this back to Jen for our next poll question.
Yes, and actually before I'm going to, while we pull up this poll question, there were 2 questions that came in the chat, and so wanted to mention, first of all, if anyone has questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat. What our tech sort of moderators are doing are pulling them and putting in a Q&A for us, and so we'll address them when we have a break for questions. But for the moment, let's answer this poll question, and then I do have one question I can answer. The question is, how much experience do you have in implementing a program in your community? Do you think you have a lot of experience, some experience, or you're new to sort of the implementation process, or no experience at all? And again, just give a sense who we're talking to, since it can be a little bit difficult when you don't see people, you know, so it'll help us. So with this, I think we have about 50 of us who are sort of in the middle, right, where we've had some experience implementing new programs or practices, and then some of us who maybe have, you know, are the sort of more, you know, versed in it, and then some of us who are new, and some of us who are maybe not in the sort of program implementation field or have not yet had done this. And so I will thank you for responding to that poll. And before I turn it to Rachel, there were, I think, 2 related questions that came in while Marcia was talking, and so I can address those really quickly, which is one, the questions was, does anyone have access to the database, and do you need any login or passwords? And so I think the database means Model Programs Guide, and so the answer is it's open to everyone. It's a public site in terms of the programs and the literature reviews. It is a federally sponsored effort, so you have full access to it. And so there's, the website was on the slides, but if you go into the handouts, there's an MPG flyer, you can pull it up, and it has the link in there. We will also provide the website again at the end. So with that, we are going to move, and like I said, if you have other questions that come up, feel free to type them into the chat. We'll pull them and answer them when there's a good transition to do so. But now, Rachel, so Marcia gave you a little bit of background on sort of what has already been on Model Programs Guide for a number of years, and continues to grow, and we continue to expand, and so I think it becomes more and more responsive and more deep. But this now is going to transfer into this new product that we just launched, the iGuides, and so Rachel is going to give a little bit of background on that process. So Rachel?
Thanks, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be discussing the work completed by DSG in close collaboration with OJJDP that went into developing the implementation guides. I'll discuss the background research and the practitioner interviews that were conducted, both of which inform the development of the overall framework for the implementation guides. I'll also discuss the 10 steps of the implementation guides and discuss how each guide is created. And there will be an opportunity for a brief question and answer session after my presentation. The development of the MPG implementation guides began under a new cooperative agreement between DSG and OJJDP. The overall goal of the implementation guides is to enhance the information and resources that are available on the MPG in order to better support MPG users who are interested in implementing evidence-based programs and practices. The process began in 2013 with the creation of the MPG Implementation Guides Development Plan. This document outlined the approach DSG would take to gather background information on implementation science research, as well as users' perspectives on implementation and other relevant information. All of this information would be used to outline the MPG Implementation Guides protocols and standards, which would be the framework used to create all of the implementation guides. Next, we began a search of the literature on implementation and implementation science. This included a review of diverse implementation guides and frameworks found in other fields, such as public health, as well as other implementation-related research found in program or process evaluations. From the empirical research, we identified a number of important factors and components related to the implementation process. With this information in mind, from April to July of 2014, interviews and focus groups were conducted with 38 professionals in the juvenile justice field and other related fields, such as education and child welfare. The individuals were interviewed because of their experience implementing programs, policies, or practices targeted at youth in the community. The practitioners were asked a number of questions with regards to their experience, such as what do you think are the key steps in the implementation process, and what are the major lessons you learned while implementing a program? We then analyzed the responses from the practitioners to identify overall themes and key points with regards to the implementation process. We crosswalked the responses from the practitioners with the empirical research on implementation. And with all this information gathered, we developed a final report entitled MPG Implementation Guides, Background and User Perspectives on Implementing Evidence-Based Programs, which I'll discuss briefly next. The final report included the recommended implementation guides, protocols, and standards, which I'll also talk about. In 2015, we worked on developing the first implementation guide, which focuses on the issue of school-based bullying. At the same time, we worked in partnership with OJJDP's IT contractor to help in the development of the implementation guide's website. We presented a sneak peek of the first implementation guide at the American Society of Criminology annual conference in Washington, D.C. in November, but we continued to work on the content of the first guide into 2016, receiving feedback from external reviewers about the guide. This feedback ultimately helped us to finalize the language and layout of the first guide. And then in the beginning of May of this year, the implementation guide's website launched, and we are now currently working on the second guide, which focuses on the implementation of diversion programs for juveniles in the justice system. So as I just mentioned, the information gathered from the literature search and practitioner interviews was put together in a final report. The final report includes more detailed information about the background research, about the methodology used to conduct the interviews and focus groups, and the findings from those discussions. So the final report is available on the MPG website, and there's a direct link to the report in the slide. For now, I'll just provide an overview about what we learned from practitioners regarding their experience implementing programs in a real-world setting. We conducted 15 one-on-one interviews and 3 focus groups. From the graph on the right, you can see we spoke with a variety of youth-oriented practitioners, including state advisory group members, juvenile justice specialists, technical assistance providers, and child welfare specialists. There were a number of topics discussed during the interviews. So for example, an important point made by a number of the respondents related to getting staff buy-in. We heard from frontline staff who said it was important to get administrators and leadership on board with the idea of implementing a new program. But similarly, we heard from those in a leadership position who also said it was important to get buy-in from frontline staff, especially those who would be in charge of implementing the program directly. Also, many respondents talked about the importance of keeping specific jurisdictional issues in mind as a program is selected and implemented. So examples of some of the specific jurisdictional issues included challenges associated with implementing programs in different settings, such as rural, urban, or suburban communities, or implementing programs for specific targeted populations, such as tribal youth, girls, or crossover youth. Some of the specific jurisdictional issues had not been identified before the implementation process began for respondents, and it created unforeseen complications down the road. For example, one respondent discussed implementing a multi-agency program targeting crossover youth, and for those who aren't familiar, crossover youth are those who are involved in the child welfare and juvenile justice system. The initiative included collaboration among court services personnel, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and child welfare workers, but the respondent described how defense attorneys were actually resistant to the change because they didn't want judges in 2 different agencies, i.e. the child welfare and juvenile justice system, to obtain too much information about their clients. So this was a specific issue that the respondent had to deal with during the implementation process, and many of the other practitioners had similar stories to tell. As I mentioned before, the responses from the interviews and focus groups were analyzed using a qualitative data software program, and they were crosswalked with the information we found in the empirical research on implementation. Overall, we wanted the implementation guides to be research-based, but also informed by the real-world experience of those in the field implementing programs and practices. To develop an overall framework of the guides, we relied on the research to guide us, but supplemented that research with the information we gained from the interviews and focus groups. So for example, the implementation research discusses the importance of finding a program champion, or someone who can serve as your go-to person throughout the implementation process, as well as someone who can help to get support for the program. And in the implementation research, we found that the importance of this point is not usually emphasized, whereas during the interviews, many practitioners explain that it is actually an essential role to fill, especially in the beginning of the process. Therefore, we thought it was an important step to highlight in the implementation guides. We use a similar process to pull out key steps in the implementation process, integrating both the implementation research and the practitioner's responses. Overall, we learned a lot of interesting information from the practitioners about their implementation experiences, and I recommend everyone, when you get a chance, to take a look at the final report available on MPG to find out more. So based on this background research and the results of the interviews, we came up with a set of recommendations and an overall framework to guide the development of all implementation guides. I'll show how these recommendations are seen in the implementation guides website. This is a screenshot of the homepage of the implementation guides on the MPG, and you'll get a full demonstration of the entire implementation guides website in the next presentation. The first thing you may notice in the banner at the top is the implementation guides focus on the pre-implementation stage, as Jen mentioned before. We define the pre-implementation stage as the steps that should be taken and the decisions made prior to the start of an actual program. We decided to focus on the beginning part of the process and provide users with guidance on important topics that should be considered before a program actually begins. This doesn't mean the implementation guides won't be useful once a program is in place. There may be an issue that comes up during the implementation process, such as questions about how to sustain a program, which the guides could provide helpful information about. Next, on the right side of the page in the blue box, you will see a section on the implementation guides topics. As Jen also mentioned before, the topics of the guides are problem-focused. The implementation guides focus on specific problems and discuss ways in which evidence-based programs or practices can be implemented to address these problems. The topics have accompanying literature reviews on the MPG, as well as a practice profile featured on crimesolutions.gov. In the middle of the page, you'll notice mention of the 10 steps of the implementation guides. Again, these 10 steps were identified from the implementation research, as well as the practitioner interviews, and I'll discuss them in more detail next. You'll also notice the puzzle piece on the home page, and you'll see them throughout the implementation guides. The implementation is not a linear process, but rather more like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. It's a collaborative effort requiring many pieces to come together to successfully initiate a program or practice. The implementation guides do not follow a specific linear model, but instead focus on important steps involved in the pre-implementation stage. That way, users will not need to be familiar with an established model in order to find specific information about a particular step in the process. Users can take any information from the pieces of a guide that is most applicable to their needs, whether that is all 10 steps or one recommendation from one step. Finally, kind of already mentioned before, but another important recommendation was to shorten the name of the implementation guides to the iGuides. So this slide illustrates the process that was established to create each iGuide. The process begins with a systematic research review and synthesis of what we call the implementation statements, which is information from the research that relates in some ways to the 10 steps of the iGuides. So for example, an implementation statement from a particular program evaluation may describe specific needs assessments that were used during the implementation process. The implementation statements are coded to what we call the implementation research coding instrument, which is available to download from the website. The coding instrument allows us to see how much information from the research base is available for each of the 10 steps. And additional research is identified if there are gaps across the 10 steps that need to be filled. The identified implementation statements are then ordered and prioritized to determine what information will actually be included in a particular guide. The implementation statements from outcome evaluations featured on MPG are prioritized before information from other types of research. Also, given the wide range of information that's available, not all of the identified implementation statements may be included in an iGuide. For example, information is included if it's mentioned across various studies, if it was found to be critical in the implementation of a program, and if it can be translated into helpful guidance for users. Next, the implementation statements are translated into recommendations for each of the 10 steps, what are called lessons learned in the iGuides. The recommendations are meant to be comprehensive, action-oriented, and most importantly, user-friendly. These recommendations are then categorized to evidence ratings we established for the iGuides, and Chase will discuss that more during her presentation. In addition, we also pull out examples from the research of specific evidence-based programs, and we also search for any other related resources or links that can be included in the guides. And finally, we send a draft of the completed iGuide out to relevant target audience members to conduct usability reviews. So for example, for the school-based bullying iGuide, we sent the guide out to school staff, including a teacher and principal, as well as parents and even bullying researchers. Based on the feedback, the language in the iGuide is revised to ensure that the most practical and useful guidance for users is included without inundating users with too much information. So these are the 10 steps of the MPG iGuides. The 10 steps are consistent throughout all of the iGuides. The specific information provided about the 10 steps will depend on the topic of the iGuide. So for the first iGuide, the 10 steps relate to the implementation of school-based bullying prevention programs, and the next iGuide will focus on these 10 steps in the context of implementing diversion programs for juveniles. These 10 steps are organized across the 3S categories: start, support, and secure. The 3S categories are meant to help organize the 10 steps into related ideas. They're not meant to establish a specific order to the steps. Again, we didn't want to emphasize a specific linear approach to implementation as we had noticed other frameworks had done. Rather, we wanted the guides to be as useful to anyone during any point of the pre-implementation process. Within the 10 steps are a number of related components which aren't listed here. So, for example, Step 4 discusses the importance of getting stakeholder buy-in and different strategies to do so, and one of the components discussed in this step is finding a program champion. So I will now turn it back over to Jen for a brief Q&A section.
Yeah, so I see a couple questions have come in, and I will start to answer them. But just as a reminder, if you do have any questions, we don't have the audio question open, so you have to type them in your chat box, and so I'll give you all a second to do that. And so as the questions come in, the first question is, what does MPG stand for? Which is a good question. It stands for Model Programs Guide. It's the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Model Programs Guide. And I know it's always a reminder to all of us to not use acronyms when we talk, which is we use this often, all of us. So I will see if any other questions came into the chat. We'll just wait 1 second here because it looks like a couple are coming in. So the question is the guide available online now? And the answer is yes. The iGuides are available. They are live. So the easiest way is, like I said, there's a couple ways to get to the link. One is you can go to ojjdp.gov/MPG, and it has the link to the iGuides among the other resources on the site. If you had a hard time capturing what that link was that I just said, if you look at your handouts sort of pod here in the webinar, there's both the MPG flyer and the webinar presentation that we're doing today. Either one of them, you can open them up, and there's a number of links in there. And so you can go, any of those links will either take you to the iGuides directly or the home page, and then you can get to the iGuides. So thank you for our colleagues who are helping in the chat box by sharing the online link. Okay, so then the next one is, will there be an implementation guide related to mentoring programs and or the drug treatment programs for juveniles? And so there is, right now we just launched with the one topic. We are working on diversion of the second one. We are in the process of developing the plan for the future iGuides, and so we'll certainly take that recommendation into consideration around mentoring programs and drug treatment programs for juveniles. I will say there are a number of resources currently on Model Programs Guide that address both of these topics, and so if you want to follow up afterwards, we can help you direct you to these topics, as well as OJJDP Support for National Mentoring Resource Center that has very in-depth information around mentoring programs and are working on a set of guidelines for at least juvenile drug treatment courts. Okay, so I will take 2 more questions, and I think we're going to move on so we have the opportunity to address the, give you a sense of the website itself, and then at the end we should have more time for questions. So the next question I'll address is, it says, a growing number of funders seem to be looking for evidence-based practices and innovative strategies. At times it seems like it's a dichotomy. Do the guides address innovation, and if so, how is the apparent dichotomy addressed? And so that's a good question. And so I would say the iGuides is in some ways trying to represent sort of the possibility of, I mean, innovation is maybe part of it, but the evidence-based programs where there's sort of rigorous research is a more, sort of narrow, right, approach to sort of what has worked in the past. And so the iGuides are trying to be more responsive to the realities of, even if it's worked in the past, your community might not have the same exact features. So sort of walking you through sort of how do you assess the sort of think about the problems in your community that you want to address, how do you assess those problems, how do you identify the resources. So it's not necessarily about innovation. It is based on research about, what has come before, but it is based on sort of a more continuum, I guess a continuum of research about sort of descriptive information as well as outcomes information, as Rachel shared in the process, and it's prioritized in different ways, but that does try and sort of address some of those complexities and adaptation and possible implementation considerations outside the evidence-based, but and then it points sort of, if there is, adaptation and planned adaptation might fit into that realm of innovation. And so with that, I do want to, I know there's a number of other questions that came in, but like I said, I want to make sure we have enough time to give the website demo. So I think we're going to move on to the website to Chase's presentation. I will try to go back to your questions, and like I said, at the end of it, we'll have contact information, and so we can try and, if you feel like your question wasn't addressed, definitely feel free to follow up with us afterwards. So with that, I am going to transition to Chase, who is going to give a little sneak peek on the first iGuide.
All right, thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. So as Rachel and Jen and Marcia mentioned, our first iGuide was on the problem of school-based bullying prevention. Our overall goal with this guide was to answer the question, what should I do to implement a program or practice in my community that can address the problem of school-based bullying? Our primary focus was to include research and evaluations of evidence-based programs if the program stated that it directly targeted bullying, victimization, or bystander behavior, and the evaluation of the program included measures of bullying, victimization, or bystander behavior. This resulted in a wide variety of bullying prevention programs that each had their own way of addressing the bullying problem. And finally, given the extensive use of social media these days, we wanted to include research on cyberbullying prevention programs. However, there isn't a lot of research on this yet. But given that these iGuides are dynamic in nature, we can hopefully update them in the future if this research comes available. In terms of a very brief overview of bullying, there are 4 aspects of bullying that separate it from other aggressive or violent behaviors. It's a behavior that stems from an intent to cause fear, distress, or harm. It's repeated over time. There is a real or perceived power imbalance between the bully and the victim. And bullying can be physical, verbal, or psychological/relational. Being either a bully or a victim of bullying can put youth at risk for contact with the justice system and for developing other problem behaviors. For example, there is an increased risk of being violent later in life by about 1/3 for victims and 2/3 for bullies. I'll now get into the specifics of our first iGuide. To do so, I'm going to walk everyone through the live version of the iGuide, specifically focusing on the 10 steps that are listed here. For each step, I'll provide a brief overview of the step, as well as the specific bullying-related lessons learned we pulled from the research. In the interest of time, I'll only go into detail about 1 lesson learned per step.
So we're transitioning to get the live demo up, and so I'm going to answer one more question while we just wait for that to load. So one other question that came in says, does the iGuides, or do the iGuides, this is hard, anyway, replace the former model program site? And the answer is no. It's meant to be additive, and it is additive. And so the iGuides is another resource type. So there's now a few different types of resources, and in some ways it actually integrates the content from the other. So when Chase takes you through, there are places where the program list that's relevant is brought in. There's places where the practice information and the literature review. So in some ways it's sort of taking what's already there and repackaging, representing, and adding some supplemental information. But it does not replace, it builds upon trying to respond to different user needs. So with that, it looks like Chase has the website loaded. I do have one tip. I think if you want it to be a little bit bigger on your screen when you're doing when you're looking at the live demonstration, if you look at the top bar there's these arrows that are facing out. If you push those arrows, it's just a full screen mode while Chase is doing the demonstration. It just might be helpful to have it in full screen mode so you can sort of see it in the right size. So with that, Chase, go ahead and take us away into the live demo.
Okay, so this is the home page for all of the iGuides. It contains a general overview of the MPG iGuides, as well as a bit of information about the categories and steps, which will remain consistent across all iGuides. For example, here we have the steps that fall under the START category, those that fall under the support category, and those that fall under the secure category. You can also find more information about the iGuides up here on your navigation bar at the top of the page. For example, if you hover over the About iGuides tab, this will take you to pages about the categories and steps, the iGuide glossary, the iGuide FAQs, the iGuide creation page, which Rachel discussed earlier, as well as the standards of evidence. Go ahead and click on the standards of evidence, which brings you to a page that displays the information about the standards of evidence we used when developing the iGuide. Research was categorized into 4 levels: compelling evidence, which was evidence that was based on evaluations featured on MPG; reasonable evidence, and that was evidence is based on evaluations not featured on MPG. This can include programs that were reviewed but rejected, or those that have not yet been through the review process. There was also minimum related evidence, and this was evidence that was based on research related to topics on MPG, but the evidence did not meet the minimum standards for review. And finally, minimum evidence, and this was evidence based on research not related to MPG and evidence that did not meet the minimum standards for review. So if you're interested in learning more about the standards of evidence that we use, you can definitely take a more in-depth look at this page after the webinar. So from here, if you click on the iGuides topic page, this will bring you to a page listing all of the topical iGuides. For now, it only displays our one iGuide, but this list will obviously be updated as we develop more iGuides. I also wanted to point out the blue box here on the right side of the screen, which contains information and links to various parts of the website. This box will actually update depending on where you are in the website. So from here, we can actually go into our first iGuide, which is school-based bullying prevention. So this is the home page for our first iGuide, and it contains an introduction to the iGuide, the goals, which we've already gone over, a brief background, which we've also already gone over, and the 10 steps as they are related to school-based bullying prevention. If you look up here at the blue box again, this blue box is now relevant to only the first iGuide, given that we're inside the iGuide now. For example, if you look at the references and level of evidence tab here, and we go to this page contains all the citations we used to develop the iGuide and their respective evidence level. As you can see, it's broken up into the various steps. For example, establishing clear program goals and all of the citations and their level of evidence, conducting a needs assessment, their citations, and level of evidence. So I would definitely say to take a look at this page after the webinar for some more information. And from here, we can move on to the first step of the guide by clicking the Establish Clear Program Goals in the blue box. Before I get into all of the information that's on this page, I wanted to provide an overview of the format so that it's easy to follow along for the rest of the 10 steps. Whenever you click on a step, this page will open with a brief overview of that step. Below that, there's a green box, and this contains the lessons learned. The sentences right here are actually hyperlinks to their specific section on the page. For example, if we click this first lesson learned, it will bring us down to that section on the page. And as you can see within the sections, there are links to other relevant steps in the iGuide. For example, right here we have identifying specific jurisdictional issues, as well as links to external resources, for example, the CDC's bullying surveillance document right here. Finally, there will also be links to the program profiles of some of the bullying prevention programs that are mentioned as examples. For example, Bully Proofing Your School, if we click right here, this will open to another page that will display the program profile for this program. So if you're interested, you can reference that. Go back. So now that we've gone over all that, I can finally get into the information on the first step. So our first step is establishing clear program goals, and this is the first step under the START category. So as you can see, we have a little puzzle piece displaying START right here. So establishing clear program goals relates to the importance of not only defining goals, but developing a clear definition of the problem you want to tackle. Regarding the first lesson learned, I've already clicked, so I'll just keep scrolling. It's difficult to understand, prevent, and measure bullying without a consistent definition. For example, what one teacher sees as normal kid behavior could in fact be bullying. Therefore, as you can see here, this lesson learned highlights various sources that can be used to aid in developing a definition. For example, government definitions and state law definitions. We also highlight the differences between two types of bullying, direct bullying and indirect bullying. Direct bullying includes behaviors that occur in the presence of the victim. Alternatively, indirect bullying includes behaviors such as spreading rumors about the victim or encouraging others to exclude him or her. We also highlight the different ways in which bullying can be expressed. So, physical bullying and verbal bullying. Physical bullying includes actions such as hitting, kicking, punching, tripping, spitting, and pushing. Verbal bullying includes actions such as taunting, name-calling, sexual comments, or using threatening words, notes, or gestures. So, to get to our next step, we have a handy little feature down here that you can just click. Oh goodness. You can just click. So the next step is conducting a needs assessment, which we informally call What's Going On. This step focuses on measuring what's going on in your school, specifically the importance of understanding the scope of the bullying problem before deciding how to tackle it. So with regards to our third lesson learned, right here, this step focuses on the variety of ways that needs assessments can inform the implementation process. For example, needs assessments can raise school staff's awareness about about the nature, prevalence, and consequences of bullying. Sometimes teachers may underestimate the extent of bullying at their school or misperceive its impact. However, teachers and school staff need to understand the bullying problem to ensure that they support the implementation of an evidence-based program. For example, as you can see right here, we highlight the Bully Proofing Your School program, which includes a questionnaire to assess the extent of bullying in the school. In the program, the responses to the questionnaire were used to heighten teacher and other school staff's awareness of the bullying problem. And just to point out one more time, if you click here, it will bring you to that program profile. So to get to our next step, doing supportive research, we will click that tab again. And this step focuses on conducting supportive research on programs and practices prior to implementing a program. There are a number of ways to research programs and practices that address the issue of bullying in schools. One way is through using evidence-based clearinghouses, as we discuss in the second lesson learned. This lesson learned highlights the MPG as a great resource to find an evidence-based bullying prevention program. The profiles on MPG can provide information about the program's components, the methodology and outcomes from evaluation of the program, information on cost and implementation if that's available, references of the evaluations that were reviewed and rated, references to supplemental information about the program, and any related practices that would be featured on crimesolutions.gov. However, there are also other approaches that can be beneficial, such as speaking with others who have implemented bullying programs can help to figure out if what someone else has done can also be done in your school. So to go to the next step, getting stakeholder buy-in, which focuses on garnering support or buy-in from various stakeholders to implement a program successfully. Through the implementation research, interviews with practitioners in the field, and bullying evaluations, we learned that without support from those involved in the effort, for example, teachers, there may be barriers to the implementation process that are hard to overcome. Regarding the first lesson learned here about finding a program champion, A program champion can be someone who helps get support from the school community and serves as a go-to person for any questions and concerns. A program champion can also provide support and motivation before and during the program's implementation. And as you can see here, we've highlighted a program, the WITS primary program, that mentions the use of a program champion. I also wanted to point out, rather than using the tab here at the bottom to get to the next step, you can use the handy little blue box to the side and get to the next step, which is identifying specific jurisdictional issues. So this step focuses on identifying issues prior to implementing the program that may set you apart from other places that have implemented the program. This step shows that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to school-based bullying prevention. Instead, it is important to understand what makes your situation unique and how these factors will affect the success of a bullying prevention program. Regarding the second lesson learned here, this focuses on the importance of acknowledging and understanding the impact that setting and values can have on implementation. In terms of values, it's important to understand your school's approach to bullying when considering a program to implement. Schools sometimes have two approaches to bullying, a problem-solving approach and a rules and sanctions approach. A problem-solving approach uses peer mediation and counseling to focus more on positive interactions and less on blame. For example, the Steps to Respect program, which we've mentioned here, would be beneficial for a school that uses a problem-solving approach because the program includes individual sessions with bullies and victims which focus on empathy, problem-solving, and practicing assertiveness. Alternatively, a rules and sanctions approach focuses on creating policies and procedures such as zero-tolerance policies or providing clear outlines of punishments for bullies. The program Bully Proofing Your School, which we've listed as an example here, would be helpful for a school that has a rules and sanctions approach to bullying because the program has a no-tolerance policy for bullying. So we can get to the next step, which is procuring funding. And this is the first step in the support category. So as you can see, we have the puzzle piece has changed up here to mention support. So this step highlights the importance of determining how much money it will take and the resources you will need to implement and maintain a program. The second lesson learned here focuses on searching for funding opportunities that can support the initial implementation. In doing so, it lists several federal, state, so we have federal here, state, and local sources that can support the implementation. Using the federal sources as an example, agencies may focus attention on school safety, school violence, and bullying, and therefore offer funding opportunities. And we've listed a few examples right here in the green box for you. It's important to note that there was a lack of research on exactly how to obtain funding. However, as you can see, this step does list various avenues to explore that can hopefully help those looking to implement a bullying prevention program. Go to the next step, which is providing program training. And this step focuses on the importance of training others to implement the program. Regarding the first lesson learned here, research has shown that teacher training can lead to significant decreases in bullying and victimization. Therefore, it is important to research the amount of training required by the program, the school's schedule for conducting the training, and which staff members should be involved in the training. For example, the amount of training time that is required can significantly impact the likelihood of staff participation. Training requirements in bullying prevention programs featured on the Model Programs Guide range from 90 minutes to 2 full days of training. For example, once again, the Bully Proofing Your School program requires 8 hours of training to cover many topics. While some schools may have the luxury of committing that amount of time, other schools may not, and therefore should not attempt to implement a program with extensive training requirements like these. Instead, these schools should explore alternative format options for training, such as online options. For example, the program's second step that we've listed here provides online training lasting 45 minutes to an hour. Additionally, given that the training is online, it gives new staff an opportunity to learn about the program without the school having to organize an entire group training session. Go to the next step, which is addressing adaptations. So addressing adaptation highlights a question that often arises during implementation: to adapt or not to adapt. One of the key lessons learned from this step is the recognition that certain aspects of the original program design may change when implemented. With regards to the first lesson learned here, sometimes a program may need to be adapted for it to fit the school's needs, setting, and problem. In these cases, it's important to identify the core elements that are linked to a program's success. For example, in one evaluation of bully-proofing your school, teachers felt that the material was too simplistic for 8th grade students. And this example is right down here. To modify the program, teachers condensed all of the 8th grade lessons into the first 2 weeks of school, and then allowed the students to present what they had learned to the 6th grade students rather than having the 6th grade teachers deliver the lessons. Evaluation showed that these student-led lessons were taught as the program had intended and ultimately helped reduce bullying at the school. This is an example of adaptation that did not deviate from the core components of the program. Our next step is handling unanticipated problems and setbacks. And this is our first step in the secure category. So as you can see, our puzzle piece now changed to the secure puzzle piece. So this step discusses the importance of understanding that setbacks can and most likely will happen. As we all know, changing the culture of an organization is not an easy process. It requires careful planning and attention, as well as an understanding that problems will likely happen along the way. This holds true for changing the culture of bullying in schools. And although you can expect and plan for some setbacks ahead of time, other problems will be harder to foresee. With regards to the first lesson learned here, possible setbacks that can be anticipated may include staffing problems, which we've listed here, problems with delivering the program, as well as funding issues. Handling staffing problems is an issue that came up in the implementation research, the focus groups that we held with practitioners, as well as the bullying program evaluations. For example, an evaluation of bully-proofing your school found that staff turnover affected one school's ability to coordinate the program. So we have this example right here. When the program implementation coordinator took a leave of absence, the position was not replaced until the end of the year. This delay pushed back the school's implementation timeline, and new teachers were not trained on the program until late into the school year. This type of staffing problems are fairly easy to manage if you plan for them. For example, the program Positive Action that we've listed here holds training sessions every year to account for teacher turnover. Overall, this step expresses the importance of realizing that setbacks are not failures, but instead learning experiences and opportunities for growth. And just as our informal title states, it's a speed bump, not a roadblock. And our last step, ensuring long-term sustainability, focuses on steps that can be taken to ensure the long-term sustainability and hopefully success of a program. Through our implementation research, interviews, and research on bullying evaluations, the importance of sustainability was mentioned numerous times. Specifically, that sustainability needs to be considered early in the implementation process, which, as you can see, is our first lesson learned. Research indicates that introducing a new bullying prevention program can take several years, so planning for the future of a program at the outset can have a big impact on the program's success. Early planning can help you manage funding and resources, show teachers and staff that the program is a priority at the school, which can also hopefully increase teachers' dedication to the program. For example, the WITS primary program, which we've listed as an example here, involves community members in the implementation process to encourage long-term support for their program. Their commitment and support increases the chances that the program will continue after initial implementation. And that wraps up our 10 steps for the first iGuide. So I'll turn it back over to Jen, who will wrap up the webinar by answering more questions from those on the call.
Great. Well, thank you, Chase. And so as I think we indicated, Chase was just trying to give you a sort of little introduction to the iGuide. There is far more information about the bullying prevention iGuide if you go to the website and click around. But as she indicated, you can go through sort of an ordered set of steps, but like Rachel discussed and Chase discussed, that they're sort of meant to both be potentially followed in an order, but also that you could sort of go in any order that you feel you might be interested in. If you sort of already have an understanding of what your problem is, you're really wanting, okay, what are the program types now? You can sort of skip around, and it was intentionally designed that way. So we have about 20 minutes for questions, so we can leave a few minutes at the end for just some final housekeeping efforts. So I have a few questions queued up in the Q&A. Just a reminder, if you have more questions, I'm going to start going through them, but if you have questions, please type them in the chat box. Even if they seem like they disappeared, what our hosts are doing are sort of pulling them into a sidebar so that we have a running list. So the first question I just want to address is there's been a couple questions, and if you're still on the line, about whether or not this presentation is going to be archived. And so Adam actually gave a link for where it's going to be archived. So if you're still there and you have to run to another meeting, there is a link on where it will be archived in about 3 weeks, so 3 to 4 weeks. It will be available. So if you just copy that link, it's also, you can, it's the online university that's part of NTTAC, so it should be available there. Okay, so now I'm going to jump to the questions. We're going to leave up the website for some of the questions in case some of them we can refer to there, but in a few minutes we'll also transition to our contact information. Like I said, if you didn't have a chance to ask your question today or didn't feel comfortable, definitely feel free to follow up. We're happy to answer any questions. Okay, so the first question that I'm going to go back to is, it says, I work at a juvenile hall facility. I've been searching for evidence-based programs that can help reduce recidivism for some of our high-risk youth that keep coming back to the hall. Are the iGuides recommended to look up a good program for these youth? And so the iGuides right now, eventually, yes, because we are expanding the number of topics. Again, it's a new resource, just sort of have the one topic so far. However, Model Programs Guide is a great resource for exactly what you're asking. You can search, so if you just go to the Model Programs Guide homepage, you can search, there's a number of programs that you can filter by topics and outcomes, and also some of the literature reviews. So I can think of a few literature reviews about youth in secure confinement that you might be interested in. Again, when I put up the contact information, if it's something that we can help direct you to, please feel free to reach out, and we can help provide sort of that one-on-one technical assistance too. I will also mention that the Department of Justice and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, as part of that, there is a national reentry resource center that also has a number of resources. So if you just Google DOJ National Reentry Resource Center, you can find it on there too. But Model Programs Guide does have a number of resources. I will respond to that. The next question. Oh, and Chase pulled it up. So you can see some of the programs. This is how you search programs by topic. There's a similar sort of topical list on the literature guides or literature reviews too. So the next question is, are the results of these studies disaggregated? So the answer is yes. And so yes, and the purpose of the iGuides are to, in some ways, synthesize research, right? So it is, the iGuide itself doesn't sort of go study by study. It's really presenting a synthesis. However, what Rachel and Chase both touched on briefly was the background for each iGuide and each step, right? There's corresponding evidence and ratings. And so in there, it is connected back to the original citations. And then if you're looking about, and so the iGuides, like I said, it's sort of targeted to be a synthesis. But if you're looking also at the programs and practices, and that's where you see some of the more individual outcomes information too, like what a specific program, if it achieves its intended outcomes. There you have some breaking out of outcomes, as well as in the practices where that's a different type of synthesis. But each of the iGuides will have those associated contents, and so that it links out to there. And so I'm going to see if Chase or Rachel or Marcia want to add to anything I just said to that response about the studies being disaggregated.
Yeah, you definitely covered it.
Okay, great. So next question, would this evidence-based program, I think registry, also have research on mentoring QLGBTT, which I believe is, we would, OJJDP would say LGBTQI. And so actually, there are a few resources related to mentoring and LGBTQI youth that are not necessarily the same on Model Programs Guide. However, the National Mentoring Resource Center, which is actually a partner effort for the Model Programs Guide, but really focuses on mentoring specifically. So it is actually also part of this database of programs and is aligned with the standards of crime solutions as well. But it is actually working on population reviews, and there is one coming out in the next few weeks, actually specifically focused on this population. That might be the best resource for that question, if I understood the acronym correctly. So the next question is, can we share this with our sub-grantees? And if so, how do you suggest we share this information or train them to use this information? So that is a great question. The first answer is, yes, please share it with your sub-grantees. We did talk about a little bit how this will be archived. So one way is to share the recording of it. Again, it'll be 3 to 4 weeks. But if you are, and we're not really capturing where these questions are coming from, again, there will be contact information at the end. But if it is sort of a large number of sub-grantees and you have a specific need on understanding the resources of the Model Programs Guide a little bit more, we may be able to do a specialized sort of assistance in terms of showing some resources on the site. So there's contact information on Model Programs Guide itself, or like I said, if you're staying on, there will be direct contact information for all 4 of us at the end of this. I think the next question I addressed early, or just going out of order, about accessing the webinar. Then the question is about whether the complete iGuides are available in PDF format, and will they be, if they're needed, to be able to be printed and easily read and reviewed. And so the answer is that we did explore this, and there is some IT with sort of, like, we're all representing in some ways the content, but we do have a number of IT folks that are in OJJDP that worked on the website, and I know we explored it, and I don't believe that we can at this time, but it may be a future enhancement. It had to do with the way the content was stored. But Rachel or Chase, do you know, am I wrong about that? I do not believe you cannot. You can print the sort of sections and expand all the sections, but you would have to go in some ways section by section to do that.
Right. I think we're kind of in the process of trying to get together PDF. The problem was the website was, the reason we went with the website is so that we could constantly update new information when it became available. In the PDF form, we'd actually have to go in and update, every little section and then re-PDF it. So I do think we're still kind of planning to explore that idea, but that's kind of why we're focused on more the interactive website. But I do know that the PDF option is still kind of there.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful to remind me. But yeah, and and I will raise this. It's a good question. It is something that is also a question for our IT, so it's a good question. We'll raise it with them. The question is, how do you download it? Will this presentation be available at a later date? I think we talked about that. And just as a reminder, too, there is a handout pod that maybe disappeared, but it was available that you can download the slides as well as and the flyer. And so I think in the follow-up, those will also be available. If you don't want to watch the whole webinar, you can sort of just download those resources too in the follow-up. The next question is this the first webinar in the series? And so, well, the answer is we haven't totally planned that, to be quite honest. However, there aren't, just due to the intensity of the content, we expect a new iGuide every 6 months or so, and so we have thought about doing a webinar to present the new iGuide when it's available, and so I think it's a good suggestion. I think it's one that we will probably consider because they are unique and they are, they will be in-depth around a topic, and so I think it's a good point. And so if, and the handout pod is back if you do want to download anything, but if you are participating today, I think your information will be captured, and so we'll try and let you know if there's additional, opportunity. Okay, so then the next question that came in is, sorry, I'm scrolling down. Do you know the topic for the next iGuide to be released? And the answer is yes, we do. So we are working on a diversion iGuide. And Rachel and Chase, I don't know if you want to, I mean, I know we've all started this, or you all have started this process. And so I don't know if you want to add any more to that other than the topic of diversion.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're kind of in the preliminary stages, gathering the evidence, identifying those implementation statements, trying to figure out what will actually be included in the iGuide. It'll cover diversion really at that kind of post-arrest but pre-adjudication stage, since that's where, again, most of the research is really found for juvenile diversion. But we're still probably a couple months away from getting the content kind of finalized.
Great. And then we will try and, as we're sort of planning this, try and indicate what the upcoming topics are. So we know diversion is next, but spent a lot of time in this first one around sort of presentation and getting the website right. And so now that we have a lot of those issues, figured out, that we will plan to keep the topics coming. So the next question I pulled up, are the iGuides intended to stand alone, or can we speak with people who created them? So the answer is you can certainly speak to the people who created them. They're on the phone. and we will give the contact information at the end. But it's not, I mean, if the question is it sort of a training and technical assistance center, that's not, its model program side is a resource. However, OJJDP has a number of technical assistance centers, and so it points to where you may actually be able to work with somebody in a more on-the-ground situation where it's available, or program developers, if that's what you're interested in, and we can help you find those resources. So it wouldn't necessarily be like a training guide per se. However, there are some more specific one-on-one resources available that connect to the iGuide. And if you have questions on something in particular, can maybe point you to where those resources are on the iGuide. Okay. So the next topic in the iGuide, when will the next topic in iGuide be released and when? And so I think that question probably came in while I was answering the other one, which is that it is, I think in the next, what we're talking about before the end of the calendar year, the next one will be released, and it will be focused on diversion. Where will the populations review you mentioned during the LGBTQ answer appear? Oh, so if anyone, so this was about mentoring that population specifically, and that mentoring, that is the OJJDP National Mentoring Resource Center. If you just Google it, it is nationalmentoringresourcecenter.org, but if you just Google OJJDP National Mentoring Resource Center, it'll be on there. However, it's not there yet. It's actually in the final stages of publishing, so it's a few weeks away, but I've seen the draft, so I know it'll be available soon. It just isn't actually available yet. However, on Model Programs Guide, there is a section about LGBTQ use in the juvenile justice system in the literature reviews, and it's also you can search programs based on certain program features. But yeah, right there. Didn't hear what you said the next iGuide topic would be. So the next one is going to be on diversion. It'll be about diversion, and so there's practice. There's a practice-related review on crime solutions right now on diversion. and a literature review, and so it's building off of those as well as the programs. And so the next one will be about diverting youth from a formal system involvement in the juvenile justice system. Okay, so any other questions? I think while we're waiting, maybe we'll transition back. Carissa and Adam, if you can take us back to the contact information, because I think, and so while we're doing that, we're going to pull up our contact information here. Just so, like I said, there's a number of questions that I think might be specialized in sort of, your own needs, and we are here to help you to the extent that we can. And so this is all of our contact information. So mine is first. Please feel free to reach out. Also, Marcia, Rachel, and Chase is on there. And so we are, like I said, here to answer your questions about the model programs guide and point you to other resources that are available. Okay, so, sorry, is there any, I'm going to do, well, first of all, while we wait to see if there's any other questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box. Do Rachel, Chase, or Marcia, do you have anything else that you want to add that I didn't address in any of the questions, or just to let people know about?
No, we think you did great. Answered everything.
Okay, great. All right, so we will wait maybe just a minute to see if any other questions come in. I think it's just a thanks here. So with that, we will actually end about 10 minutes before the NTAC. Well, actually, sorry, before we end, I will transition it back to NTAC, who is going to do a few minutes of housekeeping. So don't sign up quite yet. Again, please mark down our emails. Feel free to follow up with any specific questions about the iGuides or resources on Model Programs Guide. Again, the handouts pod has the links to the webinar, has the PDFs of the PowerPoint presentation, as well as a flyer that links directly to Model Programs Guide. Thank you for everyone. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Carissa, who will do the closing, so please stay on for just a few more minutes.
Thank you, Jen. We just have a few more reminders. Please take 5 minutes to complete the feedback survey. This webinar will be archived in OJJDP's online university in approximately 3 weeks with all the supporting materials. For more information, please contact OJJDP NTTAC or DSG. Here's the contact information. And here's the feedback survey link. Thank you all for joining us again today. Have a great afternoon.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.